Okay, first of all I would like to say how really honored and delighted I am to be here today. It was nice that you invited me here. And to keep things really simple, my talk will be pretty much structured around and by the questions we were asked to and we agreed to address in our talks. So, to the first one, why should we care about social construction? More than anything, I think constructionism cares about us. It's a forceful, liberating stance, as it is critical of the status quo, as I'm hacking puts it. It claims that an entity, object, idea, or category, or the way it is at present, is not a historical, eternal, unexchangeable, but has been brought into existence at some point and is also historically variable. So what this means, if we think of society, for example, is that constructionism suggests that the prevailing given social order is not inevitable and invariable, but has been produced or constructed over the course of history in the networks of power knowledge, as the Gordians would have it, for instance. What's more, this implies not only that in the past society may have been or has been organized or constructed differently, but that it also could be organized differently than it is at present. And they addressed the idea of being organized in a manner less oppressive, for instance. However, I also think that while constructionism cares about us and for us, we as well should indeed care about constructionism. And I mean this in two senses. The first of those senses has to do with the liberating effect I just mentioned. Although I acknowledge that constructionism may not be liberating for all. At best, constructionism may serve envisioning alternative ways of being, thinking and acting, to realize that things are not natural, inevitable and eternal, creates new possibilities for renewing our practices, for affecting and rearranging our existing relations and institutions. So in that sense, you should pay attention to constructionism for it is good for you. The second sense in which I understand the issue of care or caring about constructionism could be perhaps expressed by what Heidegger talks about Sorge, or actually more precisely the Sorge. I mean concern. We need to concern for construction, and actually I'm concerned or troubled or worried about constructionism, especially social constructionism. What I mean by this is that construction should not be taken as a matter of fact, but rather as a matter of concern. As I see the plain fact that something is constructed is relatively uninteresting and doesn't require much insight. For instance, that money is a social construct or institutions, other kinds. There's not much insight required. The constructiveness of things should not be taken as a ready-made answer, but rather as a question, a problem to be examined and to be examined empirically. So to question number 2. What does the social in social construction stand for? Is it necessary or redundant? For me, the problem with social constructionism is that it tends to understand construction only in a metaphorical sense, not literally. And the literal meaning of construction, as Ian Hacking knows in his book The Social Construction of What, is building or assembling from parts. And as far as the study of concrete ways of producing things by building or assembling them from parts is concerned, I think that the term social becomes more or less redundant, calling the practices of construction social adds hardly any extra value to their description. Apart from the fact that the process of construction doesn't take place or is not carried out by a solipsistic, isolated agent, but in relations or assemblages. So accordingly, by drawing on such authors as Isabel Stengers and Bruno Latour, the type of constructionism I'm arguing for, or I'm ready to argue for, or would be perhaps ready to argue for, can be labeled as material constructionism. Constructionism should not privilege language, discourse, and/or culture as the source of construction. Instead of assigning primary dynamism to the human realm, we should also take seriously the agency, or to put it more moderately, effectivity of non-human or not quite human things or materials. That is the capability of things and materials, from technology to commodities, edibles to ultraviolet rays, storms, chemical tsunamis, just to name a few, to affect and do something. So material constructionism doesn't explain scientific facts, for example, only by the interest and action of scientists, but it looks at how they are produced in and by various material practices which bring together all sorts of actors or actants or materials or entities or forces, and only some of those actants are human. So scientific practices on this account involve not only humans with their beliefs and linguistic constructions or formulations, but they mobilize, for example, laboratory settings, research instruments, methods, formulas, texts, and non-human life forms. You can think of natural science. So, on this view, tracing the biography or construction of scientific facts thus calls or would seem to call for a change of perspective. So, we should turn our attention from usual minds having ideas to the crafting of epistemic things in concrete material practices. Instead of human subjects standing as the sole creators of things, the materials with which we are entangled with significantly shape our human capabilities and what we are. Scientists, for their part, do not work only with theories, methods, ideas, and language, but they also, for instance, organize materials, do tests, and interpret readings in meters and that sort of thing. So in the process of construction, language does play a significant part. I in no way deny that, but it's not the sole source, or it doesn't have a sole constituted role. It's not only linguistically, if I may repeat myself, or discursively or socially or culturally that things are constructed, but material as well. So, to question number 3, and I must say that I really like this way that we are forced to present things. So I have to get rid of this sociologically indecisiveness of, on the one hand, on the other hand, I have to act as if I knew. So, what is constructed? You probably noticed that I omitted the term socially. So my answer would simply be that actually everything is constructed, but not everything is constructed socially. And nothing is constructed only socially. So let me explain this better. So for me, the idea of construction follows basically from relationality. Nothing exists solely in and by itself, independent of other things, but everything exists only in relation to other things. To be is to be related, if one wishes to have a formula. We never encounter anything out of its specific circumstances. Things are never completely devoid of relation. So So my body, for example, is a construction in that it's not self-sufficient, permanent thing, and not even inevitable as if I wanted that to be that way, but an assemblage, a confederation, a combining together or coming together of various forces, relations and forms, from DNA to molecules to food, oxygen, swarms of bacteria, physical exercise, medical history, chemicals, technology, some norms and ideals of what you're supposed to look like and stuff like that. So instead of first being somebody, to play with the words, and then setting ourselves in relation with things outside our bodies produce and acted in and by these various interminglings. It's precisely through these groupings of these various materials, what Alfred North Whitehead calls concrescence, that is the process in and by which many things become one, that we not only come to have a body, but that we also come to are a body, I'd say. Something singular and isolated, but at the same time sort of topologically continuous with our environment. So the becoming of my body unfolds in these foldings. So I tried to tackle questions 4 and 5 together. So how does construction occur and what forces lie behind social construction? So entities, to it simply, are constructed by the others they're connected to, I claim. So what is more, there's even no need to insert the human subject as a necessary ingredient for construction to take place. Construction occurs between objects, even without human beings there to observe it. I also say that we don't know in advance and in general what materials, entities and forces participate in the construction of a thing. The collective assemblage or confederation is always more or less case specific. So, and this is the problem for me with social constructionism. The problem with social constructionism is precisely that it thinks that it's only social forces that lie behind construction, and that it privileges language, discourse, culture. Because of that, I would say that social constructionism is more or less reactionary, anthropocentric ontology. It's human-centered in that it gives primacy to a relation between the human subject and the world, of relations between various non-human entities, for example, of various kinds of shapes. In social constructionism, the human subject claims metaphysical preeminence, and in my view this should not be the case if we wish to talk about ontology. So finally, to the last of the half dozen of questions we are asked to discuss. How could constructionism and realism be made compatible or commensurable? This is, without doubt, the toughest one of these questions, and would require more time than I have to elaborate on this point in detail. But let me just say that they are compatible. Much like Dave, I do not regard constructionism and realism to be necessarily incommensurable. On the contrary, I too hold, like Dave does, and Pyyhtinen in his book, Reality of Social Construction, that it's possible to be, even necessary, to be both constructionists and realists at the same time. The only thing that I do not think that many versions of social constructionism would give us a particularly realistic picture of, say, science, but would claim that material constructionism does. In my view, it adds realism to our understanding of science instead of withdrawing any from it. So, in that sense, I would even even suggest, and this is, I'm far from being alone in here, saying this, that perhaps construction could be actually regarded as a synonym for real, not less real. The fact that the thing is constructed doesn't automatically make it less valid or objective. And without doubt, if we think of science and scientific practices, for instance, the difference between a fact and an artifact is, of course, essential to science. But in order to be as valid, a fact cannot appear as being wholly dependent on a fabricated, or wholly be fabricated by the research apparatus. However, I think that the difference between what is fact and what is an artifact is something produced in and by the research practices themselves. The independence of the fact is itself an achievement. Importantly, and I will end here, that this should make it possible for us to tell the difference, and I think this is an important point, between good and bad constructions. The hard work done by the scientist and having the facts standing solidly and independently by itself are not contradictory, but they could even be considered to amount to one and the same thing, provided that the work has been done well. So in other words, the artificiality of the fact would not, on this view, run counter to its validity and truth. The validity and truth of the fact depends on whether scientists are able to produce and stabilize the kind of experimental apparatus, thanks to which the object of study can reveal from itself something new to us. So